we shall hear first the reactions from Dr. Nassef Manabilang Adiong, who is the current Director of the Policy Research and Legal Services of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority. Sir? Dr. Adiong. Yes.
Thank you, OPAPRU, for inviting me, the Bangsamoro Parliament, under the Policy Research and Legal Services. I am so glad I enjoyed reading these two papers. MSc Maguindanao is in full force today. To Grant Warren Lua, Rico Kinisalab, and Raquel Santiago Arenas' study on youth participation preventing violent extremism and radicalism, the significant role of immersive peace education. I actually commend these papers, especially when you cited the study done by Dudego and Vitro in 2020 that Islam advocates moderation, tolerance, and harmony within multi-religious society. It actually encapsulates the entire thesis and arguments of the paper, especially there are Islamic principles that are ambit to moderation, an Arabic term wasatiyah, and also similar Arabic terminologies, Islamic principles as qasad and iktisad that talks about moderation, middle way, centered, balance, and among others. And also in part of tolerance in Islamic societies, as you go along and survey the 1400 years of Islamic civilization, one prominent empire of Muslims, the Ottoman Empire, where 80% of its total demography are non-Muslims, and yet the Ottomans were able to rule the entire empire for centuries due to its tolerant policies, the Tanzimat policies. You can also see some remnants when you go to Istanbul, where a place of worship in Istanbul that is composed of one side of the building, a Armenian church, and the other spectrum, the other side of the building, a Jewish synagogue, and in the middle is a masjid. You can see the convivencia of these three great religions, Abrahamic faith traditions, as you can see in Istanbul. I have some inquiry on its objectives, especially when you cited in your paper the objectives are to describe the conflict in the locality and the impact of immersive peace education to students' view on radicalism and extremism. But it would have been prudent to present based on your study on how can the youth participate in preventing violent extremism, radicalism, whether in policy making. There is one, the Bangsamoro Youth Commission, campaign awareness in their local communities or through budgeted programs implemented by the Barangay Sangguniang Kabataan. I also would like to probably suggest to do a post-evaluative study of students who completed the MSU Maguindanao's immersive peace education programs, since the paper revolves around two questions. How do the students describe the existing conflict within their locality, and also the influence of immersive peace education? But the first research question, how do students describe the existing conflict within their locality? I think this particular question does not protrude us to get a sense of PCVE specificities. Asking general question about describing local conflict may come from all sides of the spectrum, which may relate to mere disagreements, clashes, or misunderstanding among concerned parties. And that is why you came up with findings that violent extremism is irreligious, or not based on religion, but political, purely political and cultural. That's the reason why you have these two thematic findings results that radicalism, violent extremism is purely political and cultural and not on religion. But culture as a cause of conflict is a very dangerous idea and a trajectory to look at. I'll give you an example. The neoconservative and neocolonial US foreign policy that led to the destructions of Afghanistan and Iraq, they pick up on Huntington's thesis on the Clash of Civilizations thesis and other similar theses that conflicts emanate from people's cultural and religious identities as primary sources of conflict in the post-Cold War Thus, Huntington argued that wars would be fought not between countries, but between cultures. Can you imagine that cultures of those residing in northern Luzon are in conflict with cultures of people in Metro Manila, or cultures of Bangsamoro are in conflict and competitive with cultures in people living in Davao? And also in the second research question, I'm not also sure if it's plausible to present a study on its impact, but rather I would say an influence as a suggested expression in describing the immersive peace education of how does the immersive peace education enable students to be cautious in joining social movements, or how the students develop awareness on legal consequences of their actions, and how the students who completed the MSU Maguindanao Immersive Peace Education motivated them to end RIDO, or generational conflict, and also how do these students who completed the program develop a sense of respect for diversity as a result of the authors of FGDs to selected MSU Maguindanao students. So I would also probably suggest to recommend to add a section in describing and explaining, because I didn't see this in the paper, but I did see this in the presentation there, that in how to describe and explain the conceptualization, the mechanisms and operations in implementing immersive peace education in MSU Maguindanao. I also would like to suggest some additional literature. I actually have 2 published articles. The first one was published in 2020 by Cambridge, The Muslim Governance and Salafi Orthodoxy. And the second one, an article that I published in Oxford, which is entitled Salafia in the Philippines. In the 2019 article, I actually presented a survey of history and evolution and present situation and setting conditions of Salafia in the Philippines. And in the second 2020 article that I published, I actually described the spread of Salafi orthodoxy that led to the disturbance of the 1960s polyphony of Islamicate cultures in the region. It actually changed tremendously the religious pluralism and multiculturalism between and among Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, and Christians in Southeast Asia, especially in Mindanao. And also in the article, I raised a pertinent question of how, in just over half century, Salafi orthodoxy penetrated Moro's multicultural traditions and became the dominant political theology of nowadays Filipino Muslims. Now to Margie Fiesta and Roslaini Mamalagia article from MSU Maguindanao again, the role of Madaris in preventing countering violent extremism. I have quite some reservations with the research questions that you posited, although I didn't have, it would have been a good furtherance study if you could provide a more contextualized base in each of the responses that you get from the methodology that you use. For example, what are the responses understanding violent extremism? It is difficult to surmise what is the real teachings of Islam, which may actually lead us to puritanical issues. And these puritanical issues have beset Christianity for over millennia on who holds and how to access Islamic truths, since there is a multitude of varied interpretations, multi-interpretations, and hundreds of schools of thoughts across the 1400 years of existence of Islamic civilization. Now, I commend the authors in comparing and contrast two distinct insider, outsider perspectives by looking at the literature of Homer article in 2013, Countering Violent Extremism, Peace-Building Perspective, and the Kasihag Handbook of Terrorism Prevention and Preparedness, and comparing that with the local mechanism that was done in Piagapo, which actually strengthened the madrasa education and combating extremism. You can see that in these international sources, from the foreign sources, they targeted and blamed the Madaris as the culprits of exacerbating extremism in the land. But for the Piagapo mechanism, they actually had some LGU intervention to provide a more comprehensive approach to address extremism in the municipality. But I also have some suggestions to better the article of these studies, dear authors. Since the Filipino Muslims don't have a Vatican, well, a Vatican is the single authoritative institution wherein Catholic institutions, degree programs are institutionalized compared to sporadic Islamic institutions in the Philippines. I think state intervention is realized actually. But I actually recommend to include a post-assessment evaluation and thorough reviews of DepEd, Department of Education's ALIVE program and the ISEL programs. My goodness, when I read the curriculum that was, done by DepEd, it talks about Aqidah, Creed, or Tawheed, or the unity of the oneness of God. How can small children can understand Aqidah? And there are plurality of understanding if you're going to include Islamic jurisprudence and fiqh. So if you're going to take a look at that and be the curriculum as stated in the ALIVE program and ISEL programs of DepEd, it will be very, very difficult for students. And also go back and find point of reference as well as inspiration for modern ulamas or Muslim scholars, especially take a look at the experiences of the Nizami chain of Islamic schools during the Seljuk dynasty, or the Mu'tazilis of the Abbasids, paved the way for what we call a realization of a golden age of Islamic civilization where madrasa or madaris were centers of learning. This does not only talks about theology or kalam, it is encompassing university centers of learning. There were reforms among Muslim scholars. There were autonomy of scholars, but in modern context, it needs state democratic intervention if it's necessary. And also, and this I've always been, telling this to many of the institutions, there is a need of reforms in Islamic methodology. We need to veer away from doing commentaries and tafsirs and go back to what we call the Ghazalian, Al-Ghazali and Ibn Sina's La Convivencias of Islam's with philosophy, humanities, and sciences. Now, I also would like to recommend a study that I did. It was published in 2020, also again by Oxford, The Evolution of Islamic Education in the Philippines, Schools and Institutions. This was written as I look at the evolution of Islamic education in the country. So I think these are the things that are critical. At first, I commending the merits of the paper as they contribute to the development of Muslim societies in the Philippines, as well as the lack thereof, and also suggesting some points of, how to better the paper in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive reaction, Dr. Adiong.